So, welcome to part two. Today, we're going to be thinking about how matrescence can strain our relationships and thinking about some of the triggers and some of the things that might set us off into being emotional or feeling quite down or just making things a little bit more stressful for us. But we're going to kick off with strained relationships. And Keely, you were going to tell us something about that.
Well, yes, I've been thinking quite hard actually and quite deep on the matter, and I think I could go on and on and on, but I will start with maybe kind of talking about obviously ourselves and when we become a mum and how we feel with our relationship with ourselves, let alone anybody else. And for me, I suppose I touched on it on the last one where it was kind of coming home, having a baby and thinking, oh my God, I now need to take this person with me everywhere. And, I kind of sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to get a dog. And I said, oh, it's easier to have a baby because at least you can take the baby everywhere, whereas a dog you can't. And I know babies and dogs are very different, but it is kind of that identity with yourself that leads into then the relationship with yourself. And all of a sudden, your body's changed, not just kind of on the outside, but on the inside too, and how that kind of feels and your recovery and that kind of blend of new identity, I suppose, and different sensations. Like for me, this time round on baby number two, I lost like all my sensation near enough in my nipples. And it was like, well, this is strange because it didn't happen the first time round. I mean, it's back now, but it's learning that whole kind of relationship with yourself and learning to love yourself as the new person that you kind of become again on even the second child. So that was a really interesting kind of process. And obviously your body changes again. I don't think I necessarily lost the baby weight from the first time round, which again is kind of that getting used to the new you. And we all have great intentions of, I don't know, going on a diet, eating healthy or whatever, but sometimes it's just not that easy, is it? I don't know about yourself, but it's like I don't like living my life on a never ending diet, so I don't. But you feel like you kind of have to, especially post baby. I don't know about you, Charlotte, but that's kind of how I felt.
I remember coming home from the hospital quite sore from the cesarean, and a few weeks later, when I was healed up, somebody made me laugh, and I was absolutely mortified that my belly shook when I laughed. I was like playing back in my head that thing about Santa Claus whose belly moved like a bowl full of jelly when he laughed, and I was like, oh my God, what is happening to me? Because up until then I'd been this tight-toned young woman, and suddenly I wasn't anymore. And absolutely, it was a shock to the system, a shock to the system. And it's hard to diet when you're maybe breastfeeding or anything else that will make you feel more hungry.
I don't even recommend it. I don't recommend it. I definitely didn't follow it. But all I mean is kind of it's that thought process, isn't it? Sometimes of
Yeah.
even when you've still got your bump and then that kind of goes down, but then you're left with, like you say, the kind of wobbly belly. And even when my daughter was maybe a couple of years old, she come up and like poked me in my belly and it like moved and she found it really funny. And I laughed with her and I thought, oh my God, like this is me now. This is the new me. But yeah, it's all kind of part of that relationship with yourself. And I think that naturally then flows into kind of maybe how you feel your partner might be thinking. Now, don't get me wrong, what we think's going on isn't necessarily the case, is it? But we still have those thoughts and that anxiety of, oh, is he going to find me attractive? Is it, have I changed that much? Oh, he doesn't want to be with me anymore, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of goes on and on, doesn't it? This anxiety that can happen and feeling like, you kind of want that closeness. But actually, when you've just had a baby, it's like a million miles from what you want completely. And I think that's kind of a barrier of communication sometimes with partners, because I think they kind of crave the closeness and the connection with you, yet you are absolutely blooming knackered, feel like you've been hit by a bus, your body feels totally different, let alone what goes on the inside of your body from delivering a baby. Even with a cesarean, you're using all parts of the body or bits of the body that might have been cut open, for example. I've not had a cesarean, so please pipe up if I'm not saying the right thing, but I imagine there is definitely changes in you internally, even having that surgery. It's a major operation, really, let alone the recovery. So yeah, it's just leads into kind of the dynamics of a relationship when you've had a baby and how you feel about it. So I did ask my husband, I was like, I can take it, be brutally honest with me. I was like, when you have a partner that is like nice and, I'm going back to my first child, not second, but I was only 23 at the time. So I was, in my prime, should we say. And I said, obviously, you've got this kind of slender female on your side, and then all of a sudden she has a baby and goes through this huge transformation. I was like, is it difficult? Is it different? Like, tell me how you feel. And he looked at me as if, are we really going down this rabbit hole? But I was like, I won't judge. It's fine. I can take it. And he just said, having a child is the most magical thing in the world. And he's got 4. So he said it doesn't get any less special on every occasion. And with that, it's the magic that your woman has nurtured and produced this kind of beautiful little bundle. And it's so, so precious. He said that he feels like it's just part and parcel of the expectation of change, which was really lovely. Not sure I believed him totally, but he did say about, I expect a wobbly belly. And I was like, pardon. So we did have that conversation. And I think talking to another client of mine, I asked him and said, would you be willing to share your experiences and, kind of how you felt? And I think his words were along the lines of, you want the love and attachment, and all you've got is shittiness and crying, and that's from both mum and baby. So he said that's the best way I can describe it. So I think obviously it's all very different for different people, isn't it? But we crave that kind of connection and that love, but it's a very hard time to maybe communicate it in the way that you want to. I mean, I don't know about yourself and that kind of transition for you when you brought home 2, let alone 1.
Yeah, so I think cesarean wise, I mean, they kind of want you to leave hospital after around 3 days, or they used to anyway. And you're still very sore. You start recognizing there are lots of muscles that you use to do simple things like twist to one side or pick things up or push the hoover that are now incredibly painful, and you're not supposed to lift anything heavier than a kettle, which is a completely stupid rule when I'm pretty sure almost every baby is heavier than a kettle.
Yep,
So
pretty much.
you're having to sort of exercise through this period, if only just to pick up the baby, and that can be a little bit painful. So you're probably going to be dosed up on painkillers for the first few days. And top tip, if it's anything like codeine or morphine or anything that's likely to bung you up, make sure that they give you something for that, because there is nothing worse than having a sore belly and being bunged up at the same time. It just makes the pain worse. So you've really got to think about looking after yourself, and your world becomes very small. It becomes about sort of you and the baby, and that dyad of sort of taking care of. I think my husband probably found it a little bit different. Being 2 babies, it was quite easy to just get him to help too, to be fair. So we both had the sleepless nights. We both paced up and down the hallway trying to get them to sleep, sort of passing each other. So I think in some ways I was quite lucky, because he was probably too tired and knackered too.
Yeah, that's probably really valid, to be fair. And I think a lot of the conversations I've had with clients around the topic is that also the strains on relationship, not just kind of bringing baby home and that initial shock factor sometimes, isn't it, in that change, but actually the roles that go with it. So sometimes a couple of clients said, it was that feeling all of a sudden you got to rely more on your partner or your husband, whether, financially, because statutory maternity pay isn't very good. And I'm sure not many workplaces offer like a really amazing maternity package. But yeah, it's kind of, even for me, coming from the pub and being really, really busy and having that business and I don't want to say lots in a bad way, but lots of kind of free money to do what I wish, to then all of a sudden,
Mm.
What, you're asking me to ask him for money? No, 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 no. I don't do that. That's not me. That kind of, it was so, so hard. And so we actually come to an agreement, and it was for me only, just to get my head around asking for support. I shouldn't have to ask, and I didn't have to ask, but mentally it's the journey I had to go on. And so we called it a wifey wage. So I
Mm.
just had some money that went into the bank every week, and I called it the wifey wage. So it still felt like a job.
Mm.
I didn't need to ask him for any money for anything that I wanted, because I just had this money going into the bank, and that was the only way I could get around feeling the way I was feeling. But I know a lot of people I've spoke to, it's kind of that, even the strain. So if you're not lucky enough, like I was at that time in my life, to have that, to kind of cut your money down is another strain on a relationship, another strain on a household, and whether then your partner's got to work more. That's great in one sense, but actually you're just taking away that support again, and there's more added pressure, because it's like, well, hang on, am I doing this on my own? Like, where are you? I need you. And
Mm.
then other kind of elements that come in were like, I need him, but we need money. But actually, he's here, but he doesn't really know what to do to help me in the right way. And is that communication? I think a lot comes down to communication, but also the barrier to communication, also, because, one client said, if he just hoovered, I'd find that so sexy. It's like a newfound sexiness, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I think you're so right. And it's incredibly topical because, if we think about the campaign group Pregnant Then Screwed, they've been working so hard to get sort of more childcare in place at a younger age because, we do end up giving up work or going part-time. And that might be a choice. And that's a really, really wonderful thing. But the reality of the world is that most households need two incomes. One income really doesn't cut it for most families. And so, with that pressure to go back to work, with the loss of identity that you get from not being at work, it's so important to feel like what you're doing is valued. And as we know, women's work is often very undervalued, isn't it?
You mean the 24/7 job that goes on, that's like not paid and not quite appreciated as much as a man going to work for the day? That one.
Absolutely. That one that is at the heart of that kind of equality issue and that equity issue, because anything that revolves around children or childcare tends to be undervalued.
Absolutely. And that kind of hit on another kind of topic that come up in conversations that I'd had, and that was about resentment.
Mm.
Why is it a mum's job? Why is it on a mum's shoulder? Why is it just perceived as, it's like, oh, well, your mum? It's like the new identity. Your mum, you deal with it, you take on everything. It's like the world on your shoulders. And actually that can cause a bit of resentment, kind of the coming home from work. I mean, my husband's not like this, because I definitely would not take it. But if he was to come in from work and say, "Well, what have you done all day? Why is the washing not been done? Why is the dishes? Why haven't I got dinner on the table?" I'd show him the door personally. But people do have that, and that is a reality for a lot of people. And actually, mums aren't just necessarily sitting in front of Jeremy Kyle, even though he's not on anymore. But it's not about just sitting on your backside and the child entertains themselves, because as they definitely get mobile, they get very, very, very demanding
Yeah,
in every second of silence that you worry what on earth they're doing. But
absolutely.
yeah, and part of what actually come back as feedback was that resentment actually kind of lasts on. So one client in particular was like, I'm 4 years in and I'm still bitter and resentful that he kind of, one, has had the opportunity to continue his career, to progress in his career and not have to stop. And as much as they love their child and their children and their families, it's like, why is it me? Why does it have to be me?
Mm. Absolutely. And I think that comes with that sort of archetype of the ideal mum. If we think around sort of Mother's Day and some of the kind of greetings cards and things that you get, there's always talking about an element of sacrifice. We should sacrifice something in becoming a mum. There is sort of talk around sort of being adored and having a great relationship with your kids. And sometimes all of these ideals that we're being fed culturally about what it means to be a woman in our society, it just isn't true. I know women who have struggled in their relationships with their daughters. I know women who struggled in relationships with their mothers. I know people who have mothers who are cruel, daughters who are just really, really difficult. It's not as easy and sugar coated as we see in the media at all. And that's part of why we need this conversation. We need to talk about the realness of those struggles.
Yeah,
Are
and I think,
we screwed?
sorry, go on.
I was going to say, are we actually screwed, or is there something that we can do to help ourselves?
Well, I think that's kind of part and parcel of this conversation, isn't it? And where I've spoken to anyone and said, oh, one, do you know what matrescence is? And then I obviously, majority say no, but there's been a few that have said yes. And then secondly, it's like, well, what is it and where did it come from? And then it was like, oh, it's a thing. Oh, okay. And I think the more we can have a conversation about it, the more normal it's perceived. And actually, the more kind of normal it's perceived, the more you can talk about it. So even one of the topics that come up in relationships was about, how long do you wait before it's okay to have sex? Well, clearly it depends on you as a person and what your body's gone through and how you feel. But mostly from a woman's perspective, it's very much kind of no, like not interested. The least thing on my mind. And it is an emotional thing. So, if you're absolutely exhausted, hurting in places that have never hurt before sometimes, or stitches, or whatever it may be, or actually a little bit traumatized by the whole thing,
Yeah.
which is completely okay. At what point is okay? But a man doesn't understand because they've never been through the experience, what your body's gone through, what the transition is, how you're mentally and emotionally feeling. And I'm not bigging up for them at all, but I guess they've never experienced it. So for them, it'd be like, right, we've done the 9 months, the baby's now here. So new stage, so she must be all right. Like now must be all right to kind of, go ahead and have some nookie or whatever. But yeah, it's just not reality, isn't it? And I think, again, it kind of boils down to that the men crave the love and affection, but don't understand. They don't get it from a newborn because that's newborns don't deliver that, do they, at that point?
No.
So they feel a bit isolated and broken themselves. And again, that's just a topic that, I mean, I don't think I've ever had that conversation really with somebody other than the one chap in particular. Um, but if we can talk about this and actually it's more normalized for both the man and the female, then who knows? It could lead to more people having more conversations and it being a little bit more open and easy.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I mean, the medicalization of birth, and we know that it has been more medicalized in recent times, has meant that, it's probably one of the few times in your life where you'll go to your doctor and sheepishly ask, is it okay to have sex now? Probably the only time you'll ever really ask for permission or guidance for someone for that. But it's kind of, opening up a whole part of yourself, in terms of that medical stuff, in terms of thinking about this with your partner. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes he's ready and you're not, or you might be ready, but he might be scared as well. I mean, I know that my husband went through a period of, is it all right to even hug you? And it didn't help that I had this horrible feeling that my stitches were going to burst and my tummy was all going to come sliding out. All those really irrational fears that you might still be experiencing and things like that. So, they might be a bit worried too in terms of hurting you or upsetting you or any of that kind of stuff. We also know that for most people who don't have twins, that you're changing the dynamic of your relationship, because before you were two, and okay, you might have both had work, but your spare time, you could focus on each other. You could have time for yourself.
Yeah,
Suddenly this third person appears, and they take up a lot of time. And when they're sleeping, you've got choices to make. And those choices are, do I get some rest myself because I'm bloody knackered? Or do I actually do the hoovering because it's been a week and a half now and I'm starting to look like I'm hoarding or something like that, because it's just there's mess everywhere. And so you kind of live in that reality of having to make some really, really hard choices around your time when you're feeling tired and bruised and sore. And that availability that you used to have for your partner, just it's no longer there. And instead of it being this very easy communication between two people, suddenly you've got a third person who is going to have the biggest say whenever they cry, because
absolutely.
you've got to meet their needs, right?
And for us personally in our house, we don't have parents. Clearly, we've got parents, but we don't have like active parents in our lives. So Steve's parents passed away, so we've never had that support at all. Whereas some people might be able to have their mum pop round and have the baby, you know, just while you're in the house, so you
Mm,
can at least do some pottering around and do some bits and bobs. But we've never had that. But in regards to our relationship, it's been a huge strain because
mm,
we haven't got a babysitter. And I'm sure most mums will probably agree with me that you don't just leave your child with anybody, you know, literally not anybody, but even a babysitter that might be kind of like, I'm level 3 trained in kind of childcare, but still I'd be like, is that good enough? Is that, you know, where's your what's it called, police check and everything? And even with all of those checks, I still probably wouldn't be very happy. I still wouldn't have that confidence to leave my child and then for us to have the time. And sometimes kind of it's so important to try and make that time, like even just to sit and have dinner together
mm,
and and literally be able to just talk with no technology. We've got a rule around our table, around food time, full stop. There is no technology.
mm.
So it is literally tech free zone, and we communicate and talk as a family and just discuss whatever. But even as me and my partner, you know, sometimes we won't necessarily eat with the kids because we'll wait for them to go bed. And it's really not great on the health side of it to be eating dinner at 9, 10 o'clock at night. But sometimes that's the only time we have to be able to sit opposite each other and talk and be able to kind of just have that time together.
And I think that that's so important. And Andy and I had a similar thing where our children have an illness, which meant that it wasn't always safe to leave them with other people because they didn't know how to administer the medicines that they needed, particularly when they were quite young. Didn't really know what to do with them if they turned blue and things like that, which sounds incredibly scary. But they're 23 now; they're fine. You know, don't worry
Good.
about them. Um, but yeah, one of the things that we started investing in was this idea of a date night. I think it was around the time Marks and Spencer started doing their like meal for two thing. So
Mm-hmm.
at least sort of once every couple of weeks, we would try and find that time for each other. And so when your relationship has the potential to be quite strained, it is sometimes about what can you do about that? Can you schedule some time in? Can you ask your mum to babysit? Can you do something to keep working on that relationship so that it doesn't start to unravel and pull apart?
For
Because it
sure. I,
changed.
I'm not sure what the actual stats are, but I think they're quite high. It's been a long time since I've looked, where a lot of relationships break down in that initial 2 years of the child's kind of life, really. And I think it's just because of the immense pressure that
Mm,
kind of comes into your life together. And then whether you do kind of, it's just so many pressures, isn't it? So many pressures. I mean, it sounds a little bit negative, but ultimately they're the most amazing things in the world, and I would never change them at all. But I think I like to call it like a season in my life.
yeah.
So Jude last night, bless him, had a really rough night, and I don't know what was wrong with him. Couldn't quite do anything to make him happy, and he was just so unsettled. And I woke up this morning, I feel like burning eyes down here somewhere from like a really lack of sleep and everything. But I just think, you know what? It's a season in my life. It'll get better in time. And obviously there'll be good and bad days always. But it's a season, and this season at the minute I'm kind of embracing. It's kind of baby phase, you know, he's 2 in June, and it's just a season, and we do get through these seasons, and seasons change, and ultimately it's just making sure you're keeping hold of your relationship along the way, isn't it? Just kind of doing what you can.
Absolutely. And it's natural to focus down on your baby. All of our hormones will be telling us to do that, because they're entirely dependent on us. But as they start to get that little bit bigger and everything else, it is important to keep investing in your relationship, because I always think of relationships, they're not like one and done. It's not like you get married and that's your relationship set up for life. It's a book you're constantly writing. And depending on what you write in it each day depends on how it flourishes, how the story goes, right? So sometimes it's just making that conscious effort to plot the storyline a week down the line that says, we're going to have a date night. We're going to have that communication. We're going to talk about this. Because if those people who did get divorced in those first 2 years of a baby being born had known about matrescence, if they'd have planned for it, if they had chosen to kind of plan a little bit ahead and try to invest in their relationship, would that have had the same outcome?
Well, let me tell you, because actually, me and Steve broke up when Liliana was 2.
Mm.
I divorced him because I'm Miss Independent, and that's just how I roll. And there was massive. We left the pub trade and went into a new kind of new industry and things. Obviously, I wasn't working because I was off with baby, and massive pressure, massive pressure. And there's so many things I've learned from that. And it was just, maybe if matrescence, if I knew about it then, maybe it would have mapped out differently. I'm not saying for sure it would, but I know now. So clearly we're back together. So we've done the full cycle. So we've gone together from like I was 18. So we've been on and off kind of 17 years. So together, broke up when Liliana was 2. I then divorced him. We had a couple of years apart, and then we got back together. And then I actually proposed to him last year. And I would never do that to any man, but I kind of felt like obliged, full cycle. But yeah, so we've gone full cycle. But this time round, and with this baby number 2 for us, is so different. There's so many things I've put in place, even not knowing about matrescence, just understanding how I felt after Liliana the first time round, and knowing that we broke up when Lils was 2. And clearly I don't want that again, kind of, it's not what we sign up for. We don't kind of sign up to then be a single mum.
Yeah.
And yeah, just kind of whether it was okay, I need that identity for me. So I went back to college and done a night course just once a week, just for my own sanity. That was about my identity. And then our relationship, we do schedule date nights, and we literally, it has to be in the diary, because I don't know about you and friends even, but you go, oh, we'll have a coffee, and then it's like 4 months down the line, and it's like we've still not had a coffee. So I say to people, if you want to see me, it has to be in the diary, because anything in the diary happens, and even not in the diary just doesn't quite happen. So for us and date nights, we make sure, not necessarily every single month, but we try. And even if we don't get a proper date night, we'll sit and have a nice dinner together, etc., when the kids are in bed. But you have to make that time. And we're 2 very, very different people this time round. And I guess we've kind of done and learned the mistakes from that one. So we're now in this one, and we're trying to just make sure we're on the right path. And now I understand matrescence properly, and that it's a thing rather than just a phase in my life. It's kind of just owning that a lot more and getting that support. So I've got a coach that I see. I've got 2 coaches. I've got one that I see for my life and just in general, and I've got one that I use kind of as a business coach and mentor. Best money ever invested.
It's brilliant. But I think I really love your insight, that idea that this time around you've put so much more in place to support you than you had the first time. And I know that if I was to ever do it again, although, I got my buy one, get one free offer, so I was like home clear after that. Um, I would want to do the same, because it is a shock to the system. It is going to change your whole life. There's no getting around that, because you're talking about the existence of a whole other person, and how to bring that into the world, and how to help that person then grow into who they're meant to be. That's a big responsibility for anyone. And if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't support ourselves, things fall apart. We forget sometimes when we're doing all this stuff for other people that we are the hub in the wheel, and everything we do is the spokes. And as soon as the hub's not there, the wheel doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really doesn't. And so, you know, that's part of why we're doing this talk, isn't it? It's part of why we're doing this series is, what think about what help and support you might need. Have you got any blind spots? You know, even if you're not ready for sex yet, is it still okay to just book in that date night, have that affection and connection anyway?
For sure. Definitely. And feel free for like a foot massage, that's connection. Pick up the Hoover or put a wash on, it's all very, for us women anyway, it's kind of like, oh, isn't that nice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, this is something that if you're pregnant, you could be talking to your partner about. If baby's already here, you can be having these conversations saying, I understood something today. I learned something new. You could get him on to watch us talking, whatever it takes. And just kind of thinking about, how can you help yourself? Because it's always good to do this stuff before it's too late.
Definitely. You don't want to be like me doing round one. Round one, going through the breakup, going through the divorce, getting back together, going through it again, just learn from my mistakes. Have a conversation. Put things in place.
Absolutely. And I think if there's any other message that I'd like to give, it's just give both of you some grace. The chances are you're both tired, you're both stressed, you're not your best selves right now, and that's okay. But sometimes that means we need to be a little extra kind to ourselves and each other.
Definitely. Definitely. And just to kind of finish up on the relationship side, I think it's just a really important element is kind of your friendship groups. If
Yeah.
you're going from, maybe it's your first child and maybe it's your friendship group doesn't really have children within that group yet. And that change, and just to kind of be mindful, it's a grieving process sometimes. That kind of, that sounds really, really bad. It's not like horrendous, but it is a process of grief where you've gone from being this group of friends or individuals that kind of would meet or dinner or kind of bottomless brunch or whatever it is that you do, hobbies, etc. And actually, when baby kind of arrives, it's all you talk about because you absolutely dote on them, and actually your life is consumed by another little person. But for your friends who don't necessarily have children, it'd be like, oh, I'm talking about baby again, or whatever it might be, or you're feeling mindful that you can't necessarily talk about baby as much, but because you haven't got everything else going on in your life, you feel a bit like, well, what can I talk about? So it's that change in dynamics, even in your friendship groups, or your socializing kind of disconnection, even it all kind of changes. But it can come back, and it does come back, and it just comes back in a different kind of formation, really, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's okay to transition to another friendship group. It's okay to lose some people and keep some others. It's okay to want different things out of friendships, and to kind of understand that it's all right for those things to happen, because the people who really care about you, the people who are with you for the whole journey, they won't mind. They'll
No.
understand when things are too much. I think for the first 10 days, I was just consumed by being in the hospital and being around them. And when could I get them to come home? And would they be breathing yet? Bit of a consistent theme with my tea. And all of that kind of stuff. I don't think I phoned a friend for days. I really don't. And it wasn't because they didn't mean anything to me. It's just that I had so much going on in that moment that I didn't have the bandwidth. I didn't have the space for that. And some of my friends, they drifted apart. But do you know what? I've still got some of the same friends that I still had when I was 12 years old. And
Yeah,
they've been there every step of the way. And, it's really good to know that you have people like that in your life.
definitely. I've just been away this weekend with my friend I went primary school with. So yes, very much. And then we ended up both having babies. We kind of disconnected a little bit and found out we were both pregnant. And then like the girls are best friends. So yeah, it's been really lovely, really, really lovely. But I think with regards to kind of the friendships and things, I think people have got a lot better with boundaries
Mm.
between friends and family. When you have a baby, it's like, oh, I want to come see it, and then landed on your door, kind of just as you've got home yourself. I think a lot of people have got a lot kind of a lot more confident at saying no. Like, I'll tell you when I'm ready. You can't just rock up at my house, and definitely not, within like the first couple of days or hours or whatever. Yeah, or even kind of, I suppose, having that confidence to say, you can come over, but please only stay half an hour because actually it's just too much or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
It's important to be able to say that with authority and for them to respect that also.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because it's okay to ask for what you need in that moment, you know,
Mhm.
especially if you're still at the point of recovering. I mean, if you've had a cesarean, you might have blood loss, you might have anemia, you might have, a number of things, stitches, you might be quite sore, you might have one of those lovely little rubber rings that they give you to sit on and things like that. And so sometimes that's not how you want everyone to see you.
Mhm. Yeah,
Sometimes you're just feeling a bit bruised and a bit broken and you just want to hide for a bit, just to recover.
definitely. Definitely. So yeah, I think that covers probably a lot of relationships. But I don't know about yourself and triggers because I'm sure your triggers come into many of the relationship forms as well.
Absolutely. So it's probably worth starting with, well, what is a trigger? A trigger is anything that reminds you of just like when something else happened before. And triggers can be good things. We often hear it in terms of like trigger warning. So we always associate it with something negative, but it doesn't have to be the case. A trigger can actually be something good. So if you've ever flicked through a photo album, saw a picture of a time that you can remember quite vividly and it brings back that memory to you, you've just been triggered, but in a positive way. Um, Equally, something like a smell or a sound or the way that somebody touches you, that can trigger you too. And it's worth noting that because birth is so visceral, it's quite intimate. It can be traumatic for some people. It can be a really joyful experience for others. And we will get emotional, and those hormones will be doing lots and lots of things. It is a time when we are likely to be more triggered because of those things. I mean, even something as simple as pregnant women often have a heightened sense of smell. And that in itself can mean that something that you might not have noticed previously can come up for you. And what we know from work through the police and things like that is that actually smell is one of the earliest kind of memory triggers that we have. So if people are giving evidence, it's likely to be a source of evidence that's really clear, very strong, and that sort of thing. So, if you smell your nan's perfume, for me, my nan always used to use the Vaseline body lotion on her hands, and it's got this particular smell. And even now, I can smell that, and that will bring her straight back to me, like she's right here in this moment. And that's the thing about triggers, it can bring that stuff up and make it very real, and you can suddenly have all of those feelings in the present. And it can be something small. So, for somebody who, for instance, has maybe been at the other end of an assault, somebody who has maybe had some medical interventions and pelvic exams or anything that could be a little bit traumatic, that birth stuff can bring up those thoughts and feelings again. And it's just worth being aware of that so that you can support yourself, because you can have conversations with your doctor, your midwife, and say, this has happened to me before and I'm worried that I'm going to get triggered again. You know, what can we do if that happens? How can you support me in that moment? Because really, when you're triggered, what you want to do, if it's a negative trigger, is to feel safer in that moment. And you might not be able to stop the process of birth, but actually, in that moment, having somebody be with you, hold your hand and say, it's going to be okay. I'm here for you, could be enough to just make that moment less traumatic for you. And that can be incredibly powerful. You also might find that you get triggered not just by the experience itself, but by other people. So if you found yourself in relationships that have been controlling or where people have been quite critical, as we talked about last time, everybody has an opinion on birth. People will want to tell you their war stories. People will want to tell you what to avoid and what to do and all the rest of it. And when you're experiencing lots of people's opinions, that can be quite triggering in terms of making you feel disempowered. It could take you back to a time where you felt controlled or criticized. It might trigger feelings like guilt and shame for you, because you might feel like you're not enough or you're not worthy. And that's really, really important to think about, because, you know, as we talked about last time, you know, often when we become a parent, we think about who we don't want to be. And so if we then find that people are reflecting back to us that we're not good enough, we are going to start to feel like we're the parent that we don't want to be. And one of the things that we can do is, if we have thought about what gifts we want to give our children, how we want them to have confidence, or we want them to be able to take a risk now and again, or whatever else, we can think about, how did I show up today that lived up to the gifts I want to give? Because what that does is it gives you an independent measure. It helps you to see that you might be being successful as a parent, even if you are exhausted and your mum-in-law is telling you that you're not washing the nappies properly, you know? And it's such a valuable gift you can give yourself, because you can say, well, I sat with my baby and I fed them and I held them and I gave them my undivided attention. So they know that they're unconditionally loved right now, despite the laundry and the dirty nappies that need washing, you know, because that's more important.
Definitely. And I think even as they get a bit older, like yesterday, I really hurt my back and rather uncomfortable, and even having to carry the baby because I got steps up to our bungalow and it was like so painful. So my elders actually just took him and carried him up. But then we come home and I felt rotten because ultimately we couldn't really do a lot. But when it come to bedtime, kind of, I got into bed, I lay down with her, we had a chat, we had a cuddle. I mean, she's nearly 12 and I'm still getting it. So I think it's going to stop soon. But it gives you that sense of accomplishment that regardless of not feeling like we did a lot after school, ultimately she still had that undivided attention. Like you say, she knows she's loved, she knows she's valued, she's got that kind of that time, a bit like our partners and relationships ultimately, isn't it? It's allowing that time with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when we have an idea of ourselves as getting it right, living up to the things that we want to, even if we don't live up to all of those things every day, you know, it's okay to give that unconditional love today, but maybe not do anything too much about confidence, because actually nothing came up that would, you know, be appropriate for that, you know. But it's being able to say at the end of every day that you've done that one thing, you've done those two things that really, you know, are going to help in the future. Because it's a bit like putting fertilizer on a plant. You do it regularly enough, that plant is going to grow. You're going to give it the right conditions to be the most beautiful plant you've ever seen. And if you don't, then it's going to end up being a twisted twig, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you are a first time mum, particularly, but even the second time around, it's so easy with all that criticism coming your way to just lose your confidence. And that, again, might take you back. It might take you back to an exam that you didn't do very well that made you feel stupid. It might take you back to a time when somebody told you you were stupid because you didn't know something. And that becomes a problem when we then feel like we can't ask for help or ask the questions that we need to ask. And as I'm sure every midwife and health visitor will tell you, there are no stupid questions. You know,
No,
okay.
no. And I think this time round, I felt so much pressure to go to baby groups. Oh, well, have you signed up for this class? Oh, have you signed up for that class? Oh, are you doing that? And at the beginning, I did because I felt like that's what I had to do. Like there was this weird pressure on me, even though I'm not a first time mum. It was like, oh, well, I must do that and I must do that. And so I kind of signed up to swimming. I mean, blimey, he was not even, well, he was dinky. He was dinky dinky. But anyway, swimming and baby massage and all these things. And at some point, I just had to stop and think of me and was like, what am I doing? This is not, I'm doing this for what feels like everybody else. And yes, I'm sure Jude was getting something out of it, but actually, what I wasn't, and it wasn't okay for me. And I had to just take that time to think, you know what, he is getting everything he needs from me, love, food, stimulation, all of those kind of things at that point in his life that I didn't need to be putting the additional pressure on myself with all the other stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so easy to be triggered into I should. And if you find yourself, mentally saying, I should be, or I feel guilty, or I could have done that, those coulda, shoulda, ifs and buts and all the rest of it, they need to go. They need
Mm-hmm.
to go. It's okay to bring up your child in a way that feels comfortable for you, at an energy level that you feel you can maintain. And,
Yeah.
you know, yes, they are seeing people. It doesn't matter if they see people their own age, in every other sphere of their life, other than school and nursery, they will have to interact with people who are older than them, younger than them, people from different cultures, people from different backgrounds. That's the reality of the world that we live in, and if they're going to work and they're going to work with someone who's nearing retirement age and somebody who's just come up from university, it's important that they learn to communicate with a wide range of people, not just people their own age.
Absolutely, for sure.
So, so valuable in terms of a life skill.
Definitely. Definitely. And I think, just do what's right for you ultimately, isn't it? It's kind of
Yeah,
literally listen to you. And if something feels too much, just step back. You can go back to it ultimately. But yeah, if it's just too much to you, don't worry about anybody else. Even, what your mother's got to say or your dad, well, I used to, blah, blah, blah. All of that kind of stuff. Just do it your way. It's your life, your baby, your family. And ultimately, mum knows best.
and it's okay to even say that to your health visitor and just say, actually, we're signed up for one or two things in a week, but I can't commit to more than that right now because,
Mm-hmm.
we've got other things that we do.
Yeah, I care for my nan, and she's got Alzheimer's. And up until I was about 24 weeks pregnant, she lived with me full time,
Mm.
and then it just was just way too much. But for me, 2 days a week we go and take her out, and that's kind of what our time. So yeah, to try and kind of keep up that plus baby groups plus everything else that goes on, it was just too much. It was too much.
Absolutely. And you're right, some of us do have other caring responsibilities. It might not be your nan, it might be your mum, it might be your dad, it might
Yeah,
be that other things happen. And it's okay to not be perfect all the time. And we wouldn't want to be either. There is this, as we said, this ideal mother kind of archetype. But actually, being perfect all the time is not going to help your child because life happens. And what we need to foster in our children is a kind of resilience to that. How do they bounce back if something doesn't go right? And actually, the person that they learn that from is you. And so, if you're trying to be perfect all the time, never show any mistakes, never show them any problems, how do they learn from you? Because children, about 80% of the time, will learn through mimicking or copying in some way. And they do it so well. I mean, if you've ever watched a 4-year-old play mums and dads or dress up, as soon as that costume is on, you cannot call them by any other name. If they are Spider-Man, they are Spider-Man, and you cannot address them as anything else because they literally take on the whole persona. They do the stances, everything about them becomes Spider-Man. And it's a really great skill that they have to be able to mimic and copy. And you can bet that, whatever you do at home, they're telling their teachers.
Oh, absolutely. And even when Liliana was younger, I'm really smiling because it's just brought back a memory. For me, like the dogs and kids, anyone's dogs and kids, they get a finger. When the finger's out, and I'm like, enough. And when I say enough, like that is my limit. And so when she was playing mums and dolls and babies and stuff, and I just remember kind of peering in the door and she was like, enough. And I really, really chuckled to myself, oh no. Yeah. So they definitely pick it up for sure.
But she's learning boundaries. I mean, probably my most embarrassing moment was I think it was around my birthday or something like that. And we'd got pizza for dinner, but there was some left over. And we decided that it would be fine for the boys to have pizza for breakfast the next morning. What I didn't realise was that they were doing a topic at school at the time around breakfast, and they did this great big display in the main school hall about what they had for breakfast and what their favourite breakfast was. So, of course, mine were the only two that had freaking pizza on the wall. But every parent who ever went into the hall for any assembly to see for a whole half term, and I was just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, you can't pick it up sometimes, can you?
No, no. So it's kind of just worth remembering that you will have moments like that. And, that's fine. Because when we don't always meet every single one of their needs, if we do leave them to cry for a little longer than we would like to because somebody's turned up at the door or whatever else, it's not that you failed. It's okay to give them a bit of space to learn a bit of resilience, learn what to do with their own time if they've got a gap or a space. You don't have to fill their time with constant activities because they learn creativity when they're given space and
Yeah.
time that's not managed by somebody else. And these kind of skills are actually becoming more and more important in our very connected, internet heavy sort of society because these are the skills that will help our future entrepreneurs. These are the skills that will help businesses improve. These are the skills that bring about innovation. So actually, by being a good enough mum and having some mess ups and slip ups and showing them how to bounce back and everything else, you will have a child that is much more resilient and much more creative. And that is so important.
I've always been one to not hide away when I'm sad or upset or crying. And I'm not really a crier, so it takes quite a lot for me to cry. But I won't then necessarily go and lock myself away. Kind of when my nan went into the care home, I literally kind of went into like mass grief. It was as if she was dead to me, basically, like the grief I was feeling. And I'd walk into like anywhere in the house and wherever, she would have been sat having dinner and I'd just go and just, or, just really stupid things. I'd look at something and then she'd go, oh, she's going again. But to explain to her the depth of love and like share with her kind of the stories and why and things, or even if it's something that's happened in life and maybe something's not gone to plan, or I don't know, maybe I've just having a meltdown for whatever reason, I've never been one to shy from that, because I think it's so important for them to understand that it's okay to let your emotions out. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to share what's happening and why things aren't going right. And some people might say, but she's a child and she doesn't need the burden. I don't go into depth and detail, but I also say that in life, sometimes things don't go to plan. In life, sometimes people upset you or whatever it may be, and to kind of to share those moments. And I've always been the same with my partner too. Like when his dad passed away, he was really upset, and I was like, please don't shy away from our daughter, because I think she really needs to understand and see that it's okay for men to cry and for men to be upset and to them to have that emotion. So it's something I felt very strongly about in our house.
And you've given us a brilliant segue into the next video, because next time I'm going to be talking about unexpected thoughts and feelings, which definitely does come up. What is it you're going to be talking about?
Wow, I thought you might just say that, and I thought, oh, I better double check. What is it I'm talking about? Is it going crazy and having support? Ultimately, I think I've got on my sheet. I was all very organised until that moment. I got real bad pins and needles. Oh, so
Absolutely. We're going to be looking at, not just the unexpected thoughts and feelings, but that idea of, when you're feeling crazy, can you get some support? And if so, what does that support look like for you? So yeah, it's an important topic.
once I got rid of my pins and needles. But yeah, I think like I say, just if I just had that support,
Mm,
even in between my two, just to understand more. And even now, we do a lot of things in our relationship to make sure we don't go back to how it was, for example. And yeah, that support is so important.
absolutely. So we'll leave it there for today, and hopefully you'll watch the next video in the series and find out all about this. Take care, everyone.
Bye.